I wanted to point your attention to an op-ed that was just published in the January 24th edition of the Wall Street Journal. This op-ed comes from Tom Perkins, who is a founder of Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, and he seems to be addressing a concern that those who have made it up the ladder are, well, it's probably better if I just read it.
Yeah.
Regarding your editorial, Censors on Campus, of January 18th, writing from the epicenter of progressive thought, San Francisco, I would call attention to the parallels of fascist Nazi Germany to its war on its 1%, namely its Jews, to the progressive war on the American 1%, namely the rich. From the Occupy movement to the demonization of the rich embedded in virtually every word of our local newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, I perceive a rising tide of hatred of the successful 1%. There's outraged public reaction to the Google buses carrying technology workers from the city to the peninsula high-tech companies which employ them. We have outrage over the rising real estate prices which these techno-geeks can pay. We have, for example, libelous and cruel attacks in the Chronicle on our #1 celebrity, the author Danielle Steele, alleging that she is a snob, despite the millions she has spent on our homeless and mentally ill over the past decades. This is a very dangerous drift in our American thinking. And he goes on once again to tie it to Nazi thinking and the scapegoating that was available there. Thought this would tie in somewhat to our discussion on upward mobility because it gives us a perspective from the people at the top of the ladder. When you hear about this complaint from the 1% and the people in the top of the 1%, what reflection does it have in your mind?
Well, it's fascinating. It's the war of rhetoric. They're going to have us believe that the most privileged segment of our society is actually the most marginalized, that they are in the position of people who are set upon and besieged by barbarous masses or by ideologues bent on taking what isn't theirs and being unfair in that way, when actually what it is that they're criticizing is at the very heart of the American ethos. That is suspicion of inherited privilege. The problem people have with the 1% and ties into our more general discussion of social mobility generally is that it's a kind of inherited, undemocratic privilege. You know, your kids of the 1% or of the top quintile, say the top 20%, your kids have a much better life chance than kids from the bottom quintile or bottom half of the socioeconomic spectrum. And so there's a real concern about a casino economy that distributes wealth unfairly, unevenly, and doesn't allow for any kind of real mobility up and down and perpetuates a kind of inherited privilege based on class grounds rather than on, say, racial grounds. You see the problem with accidents of birth, inherited privilege when it's racial, but why should a kid born in Beverly Hills have so much better life prospects than a kid born in South Central? When they're both equally innocent children. They were both, neither of them had any control over what family they were going to be born into, but we're saying for the one kid, you only have an 8% chance of climbing out of the bottom quintile into the top, whereas the other kid born in Beverly Hills, you have a much greater chance of winding up in the top quintile of the population in income and earnings.
But is that kind of op-ed also demonstrative of a very dangerous kind of perspective or disassociation? Is it the kind of Marie Antoinetteism that we are seeing? I mean, he's comparing himself to people who had their bank accounts completely erased, the people who were denied trains, who were kicked out of their jobs, who were eventually killed en masse on a genocidal scale. And there's a perspective here when you decide to evoke the Holocaust and evoke World War II, which I think if you're going to say, woe is me, you need to have a larger issue.
Andrew, I, as part of my work, had an invitation from the U.S. Embassy in Poland and toured major universities there, and of course had to stop at Auschwitz as part of my tour outside Krakow. And you cannot walk through those camps, those concentration camps, and look at those ovens and look at that atrocity and feel comfortable with glib analogies to that tragedy, right? What happened there was rooted in irrational prejudice against a people, all right, not on the basis of democratic principles like we should strive for a more equal society, which, by the way, a lot of Jewish brothers and sisters have fought for intellectually and on the lines throughout history, I might add. But it wasn't that kind of movement. No, they were running those trains and getting those people into them and into those gas ovens on the basis of prejudice, hatred of a kind that is nothing like what we're doing when we're talking about economic democracy, spreading the wealth, being fair to everyone, not trying to soak the rich either, but not having the rich get so far removed from the rest of us that we aren't even living in the same social space and on the same planet. Very different cases.
So is this kind of logic to you, is it just bad logic? Is it lazy logic? Is it easy logic? Or is it potentially dangerous and malicious logic?
The latter, because it's part of a rhetorical war. It's part of an effort to say that any kind of progressive movement to address social and economic inequality and to redistribute wealth and power is really reactionary. And it's rooted in resentment and hatred of the rich by the poor, hatred of the haves by the have-nots. It's very much part of a rhetorical war in which they're trying to cast themselves as the victims and the marginalized group. And we can't allow that framing, I think, without interrogation. We have to talk about that and not allow at least, kind of volatile historical metaphors like the Holocaust, which there is nothing like. Don't compare anything else to the Holocaust, but certainly not this. Glib comparisons don't help the conversation.